Late autumn in New York has a way of making you feel lost, even more so when you're invisible in your own marriage. That's where I found myself, next to John, my husband, who might as well have been 1,000 miles away, buried in his work. I tried everything to grab his attention, to bring back the spark we once had, but it was like whispering into the wind. Then came the work gala, a night I expected to be just another evening shadowed by John's accomplishments. But that's where I met Alex. He was everything John wasn't at that moment: attentive, charming, and oh, so complimentary. His words weren't just heard, they were felt, making me come alive in ways I hadn't in months. It was wrong, but it was exhilarating. A surprise weekend getaway from John should have been the perfect antidote, but it turned out to be the opposite. There he was, a phone in hand, lost in emails and calls, leaving me to wander the hotel alone, feeling more like a solo traveler than a wife. I returned to New York more disconnected from John than ever, my mind replaying Alex's words like a favorite song. Coffee with Alex started innocently enough. We'd talk, laugh, and for a brief moment, I could forget the chasm at home. But with every cup, I felt myself slipping further away from my vows, drawn to Alex's magnetic pull. I told myself we were just friends, but even I didn't buy it. The night I decided to meet Alex for drinks, telling John the first was out with the girls, marked the point of no return. The mix of guilt and thrill was intoxicating, a cocktail of emotions I hadn't anticipated when I slipped into the little black dress that screamed anything but innocent. Our affair began in a whirlwind of secret glances and stolen moments, a secret life built on lies and the intoxicating connection I had with Alex. Every message, every touch, was laced with guilt towards John, yet I couldn't pull myself away from Alex. John's suspicions crept up like shadows at dusk. His questions about my nights out became more frequent, his gaze more probing. I spun tales of girl nights and late work meetings, but each lie felt like a weight, dragging me deeper into a sea of guilt. The stress of living a double life began to wear on me, the once thrilling adventure now a tightrope walk above a looming abyss. I knew something had to give, but I was caught in the inertia of my choices, unable to see a way out that didn't end in freefall. Hearing John on the phone, arranging for a private investigator, felt like a punch to the gut. My heart raced, a mix of fear and disbelief swirling inside. This can't be happening, I whispered to myself, the walls of our apartment closing in. The thought of ending things with Alex crossed my mind, a fleeting hope to stop the inevitable crash. But who was I kidding? My feelings for Alex were a tangled mess I couldn't escape. The evidence came like a storm, photos of Alex and me, captured in moments I thought were hidden from the world. John didn't confront me, didn't throw accusations or demand explanations. He was silent, a strategy that was more terrifying than any words. Knowing he had those pictures, seeing the life we built together hanging by a thread, I felt trapped in a nightmare I had helped weave. In a desperate bid to reclaim some control, some semblance of the thrill that had led me down this path, I planned a date with Alex. A bold move, no underwear, a secret rebellion against the suffocating reality of my life. It was reckless, fueled by a need to feel alive amidst the chaos. But deep down, I knew I was playing with fire. John's appearance at the restaurant was the last thing I expected. There he was, the embodiment of calm, but his eyes, they were ice. How could you? Wasn't asked, but it was written all over his face. My words deserted me, guilt and shame choking any attempt at explanation. The man standing before me was a stranger, his cold demeanor a far cry from the husband I thought I knew. He left without a scene, a silent storm exiting as quickly as he had appeared. The aftermath left me reeling, the weight of my actions crashing down. It was a wake-up call, a harsh reminder of the consequences of my choices. The gravity of what I had done, of what I had risked, hit me hard. Our marriage, once a safe haven, now felt like a house of cards, fragile and teetering on the edge of collapse. Reaching out to John was like trying to grasp smoke. Calls, texts, emails, all went unanswered. The silence from his end was a clear message, a void where our conversations used to be. It was in this silence that I found myself truly alone, left to navigate the wreckage of my own making. Then came the blow I hadn't anticipated. Checking our bank accounts, I found them emptied, a stark, unforgiving zero staring back at me. It was John's first strike, a move that cut deep, leaving me financially and emotionally stranded. No words were needed, his actions spoke volumes. It wasn't just about the money, it was a declaration of war, a clear sign that reconciliation was off the table. The realization that I was on my own, that the safety net of our marriage had been irrevocably cut, was a bitter pill to swallow. With each passing day, the enormity of what I had lost began to sink in. John's silence, the empty bank accounts, the cold look in his eyes, it all pointed to a future I wasn't prepared for. A future where I had to face the consequences of my actions, alone. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, Alex dropped the bomb. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice shaking, the fear in his eyes mirroring the chaos our affair had caused. The words hit like a freight train, leaving me dazed, alone in the wreckage of what we had. Betrayed by the very person for whom I had risked it all, I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. The next blow came swiftly. John, armed with months of gathered evidence, filed for divorce on grounds of infidelity. The proceedings were a blur, a swift and merciless legal battle where I stood no chance. John's meticulous documentation painted a picture I couldn't refute, and before I knew it, I was stripped of everything. The settlement left me with nothing but memories of a life that now felt like a distant dream. It was then I realized the extent of John's planning. He had been 2 steps ahead from the start, using my betrayal as a chess piece in a game I didn't even know we were playing. The realization was a bitter pill, leaving me reeling from the magnitude of my naivety. I was outmaneuvered, outplayed, and left to face the consequences of my actions alone. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Friends who I thought would stand by me sided with John, their judgment swift and unforgiving. Family members, once my closest allies, now looked at me with eyes full of disappointment and betrayal. My reputation, carefully built over years, crumbled in an instant, leaving me ostracized from the very community I had once called home. As if to twist the knife further, John left the city, his departure a clear signal of moving on. Rumors of his flourishing career and new life reached me, a constant reminder of what I had lost. There I was, stuck in the same place, haunted by the ghosts of my choices, while he built a new world without me. In the aftermath, I attempted to rebuild my life, but the damage was irreparable. The affair, once a secret thrill, had become my undoing, branding me a pariah in a society that had once welcomed me with open arms. Job opportunities dried up, doors once open now firmly shut, as John's final act of revenge became apparent. My affair was no longer a private matter, it was public knowledge, a scarlet letter that made it impossible for me to find employment in our industry. Every attempt to start over was met with whispers and sideways glances, a constant reminder of the scandal that had defined me. The isolation was suffocating, a relentless reminder of the cost of my choices. In a city that never sleeps, I was wide awake, facing the stark reality of my new existence. The journey from being half of a power couple to a social outcast was swift and brutal. With each passing day, the weight of my decisions bore down on me, a constant companion in my newfound solitude. The life I had known, the identity I had crafted over years, was gone, leaving me to navigate a world that no longer had a place for me. John's departure and the dissolution of our marriage marked the end of an era, but it was his final act of revenge that sealed my fate. In making my affair public, he had not only taken everything from me but had also ensured that the shadow of my actions would follow me, a dark cloud over every attempt to rebuild. As I faced the reality of my new normal, the magnitude of my fall from grace became painfully clear. The journey ahead was uncertain, a path marred by the consequences of a choice that had seemed so inconsequential in the moment. The cost of my actions, once hidden behind the thrill of the affair, was now a debt I would spend a lifetime trying to repay. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying the video so far. If you do, please take a moment to hit that like button, it really helps me out and lets me know you appreciate the content. Also, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. Subscribing is a great way to stay updated with all the latest videos and to be part of our growing community. It's quick, it's free, and it ensures you won't miss out on any upcoming content. So go ahead, smash that like button and hit subscribe. Your support means a lot and keeps this channel going. Thanks for watching. Sitting alone in the dim light of my tiny apartment, the magnitude of my mistakes crashes over me like a relentless wave. The affair, a fleeting escape from my unhappiness, had cost me everything. As I sift through the debris of my shattered life, I can't help but wonder, was it worth it? The silence that follows is a deafening no. Regrets flood in, but they're like rain against a closed window, useless now. Then, as if fate had one more cruel twist of the knife to offer, the divorce papers arrive. Not just any day, but on the anniversary of our wedding. The irony isn't lost on me, it's a cruel reminder of the full circle my life has taken. From saying, I do, to saying, I don't, in the span of a few years. The symbolism is as clear as it is painful. Signing those papers, my hand trembles, not from the cold of my barely heated apartment but from the realization of what this act represents. It's not just the end of my marriage, it's the closing of a chapter of my life, one that had its highs but ultimately plummeted into the abyss. There's no redemption here, no last-minute twist where everything is made right. It's just the end, stark and unyielding. Packing up my life into boxes feels like trying to contain a sea of memories within cardboard walls. Each item a reminder of what was, what could have been, and what is now lost. New York, with all its vibrant chaos and unfulfilled promises, has nothing left for me. The city of dreams has become the landscape of my nightmares. On my last night, drawn by a masochistic need to torment myself further, I stroll past our old apartment. Through the window, I see a happy couple, their laughter echoing into the night, a stark contrast to the silence that now envelopes me. It's a visceral reminder of the happiness I squandered, the life I dismantled with my own hands. Leaving New York at dawn, the city's skyline recedes in the rearview mirror, a symbolic farewell to the past, to the mistakes that defined my recent life. The open road ahead offers no promises, but it does offer distance from the wreckage of my past. Settling in a small town feels like stepping into another world. Here, no one knows my name, my story, or the scandal that upended my life. It's anonymity and a semblance of peace, but the shadow of my past is a constant companion, a dark cloud in a clear sky. Finding work at a local cafe is a humbling experience. Gone are the days of power lunches and boardroom battles. Now, it's the simplicity of brewed coffee and daily specials. It's not the life I envisioned, but it's a life, a chance at some form of redemption, however small. Then, as if to remind me that the world moves on regardless of our personal catastrophes, news of John's engagement finds its way to me. He's moved on, found happiness anew. It's a bitter pill, knowing he's rebuilt the life I tore down, while I'm still learning to live with the aftermath of my choices. This new chapter, far from the world I once knew, is marked not by the achievements of my past but by the lessons of my downfall. As I navigate this unfamiliar terrain, the scars of my betrayal, the weight of my decisions, are ever present. Yet, in this quiet town, amid the simplicity of my new life, there's a glimmer of hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, redemption isn't about erasing the past but learning to live with its lessons. Dipping my toes back into the dating pool felt more like stepping onto thin ice. Each attempt to connect with someone new was shadowed by the specter of my past. Conversations would either skid to a halt at the mention of my history or, worse, spark interest for all the wrong reasons. It was disheartening, navigating the murky waters of judgment and curiosity, a stark reminder that my actions had branded me in ways I couldn't easily shake. In the midst of this loneliness, I found an unexpected source of comfort, a cat. Adopting her was a spur-of-the-moment decision, fueled by the need for companionship without the complexity of human relationships. She was a quiet presence, her purrs and antics a balm to the ache of isolation. It was a simple, unconditional connection, but it meant the world to me. Therapy became my weekly ritual, a safe space to unravel the tangle of my emotions and actions. With each session, I delved deeper into the why and the how of my past choices, confronting the pain I had caused and the pain I felt. It was a humbling journey, learning to forgive myself not as an act of absolution but as a step towards healing. An old friend re-entered my life around this time, one who had missed the storm that had upended my world. Reconnecting with her was like finding an oasis in a desert, a reminder that life still held pockets of normalcy, of potential new beginnings untouched by the chaos of my past. My therapist suggested an exercise. Write a letter to John, pouring into words all the apologies and regrets that haunted me. It wasn't about seeking forgiveness from him, but about articulating my acknowledgement of the hurt I caused. Writing that letter was like opening a vow, releasing a flood of emotions I hadn't realized I'd been holding back. It was cathartic, a step towards closing a chapter that had remained stubbornly open. In searching for outlets for my swirling emotions, I stumbled upon painting. Each brushstroke was a release, colors and forms translating my inner turmoil into something tangible. My art wasn't about creating beauty but about finding a voice for my pain, a way to process and express what words often couldn't. Volunteering at the local shelter became another avenue for healing. Helping those in need, offering my time and heart, felt like a tangible way to make amends, not to the people I had hurt directly, but to the world I had withdrawn from. Each act of kindness was a step on the path to redemption, a way to rebuild myself into someone capable of contributing positively to the lives around me. A turning point came when a small article one wrote, reflecting on my journey of starting over, was published in a local paper. It was a modest piece, but seeing my words in print, sharing my story of falling and finding the strength to rise again, felt like a victory. It was an acknowledgement of my pain, but also of my resilience. Encouraged by the response to my article, I started a blog. It became a platform for sharing the raw and real journey of recovery, of the lessons learned in the aftermath of life-altering mistakes. The blog connected me with a community I didn't know I needed, people who had walked similar paths, who understood the struggle of rebuilding oneself from the ground up. The most affirming moment came in the form of a letter from a woman who had found my blog during her own tumultuous divorce. Her words, filled with gratitude for the solace my experiences had brought her, were a powerful reminder that our most painful chapters could offer hope to others. It was a poignant realization that while my past actions had caused much hurt, my journey towards healing could be a beacon for those navigating their own darkness. The day I signed the lease for a better apartment felt like a victory. It wasn't just about moving to a nicer place, it was about moving forward, stepping away from the shadows of my past. The space was modest, yet it represented something immense: progress. Each box I unpacked was a small declaration of independence, a tangible sign of the distance I'd come from the depths of my despair. Forgiving myself was a journey, not a single moment of epiphany. But gradually, I began to accept that while I couldn't rewrite the past, I had the power to shape my future. This realization didn't erase the pain or the regret, but it allowed me to view them through a different lens, one of learning and growth. It was liberating, feeling the weight of self-blame start to lift, making way for a cautious optimism. The local art show was a milestone. Seeing my work displayed alongside other artists was a tangible reflection of my journey. Each piece told a story of struggle, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of expression. The pride I felt was profound, a validation of my new path and the identity I was slowly rebuilding. A casual conversation at the cafe where I worked blossomed into a friendship with a fellow artist. It was refreshing, connecting with someone who knew me only for who I was now, not the turmoil of my past. Our shared passion for art provided a solid foundation for a friendship that felt both new and deeply familiar. This friend became my gateway to a small, vibrant art community. Within this circle, I found acceptance and encouragement, a stark contrast to the isolation that had once engulfed me. It was a reminder that belonging isn't about fitting a mold but about finding spaces where our authentic selves are celebrated. Selling my first painting was a moment of quiet triumph. The buyer, a local who'd seen my work at the art show, offered a modest sum. It wasn't about the money, though that was certainly welcome. It was about the recognition, the affirmation that what I created held value to someone else. It was a sign that there was a place for me in this new world I was navigating. Teaching art classes at the community center became my next step. Sharing my passion, guiding others to find their voice through painting, was unexpectedly fulfilling. Each class was a reminder of the transformative power of art, not just for the students but for me as well. The anonymous donation to my blog, accompanied by a note of gratitude for my honesty and courage, was a poignant reminder of the impact my words could have. It was a small gesture that carried immense significance, reinforcing my belief in the path I had chosen. Planning the art exhibit was both exhilarating and daunting. The themes of renewal and forgiveness were close to my heart, reflecting my personal journey. It was a project that merged my past with my present, an opportunity to share my story through the universal language of art. The exhibit's opening night was a blur of faces, conversations, and emotions. But amid the whirlwind, there was a moment of profound clarity. Surrounded by my art, supported by friends new and old, I felt a deep sense of belonging and purpose. The journey from the depths of my lowest point to this moment had been long and fraught with challenges. Yet, here I was, not just surviving but thriving. My past, with all its pain and mistakes, would always be a part of me, but it no longer shackled me. I had begun a new chapter, one filled with hope, healing, and the promise of new beginnings. My finger hovered over the send button. One click, that's all it took. Hitting enter on that message, telling my husband the truth about my affair, changed everything. Boom, my world imploded. You think you know how these stories go? Trust me, you don't. This isn't about getting caught or begging forgiveness. Think more along the lines of lies spiraling out of control, whispers behind my back, and a twist of fate that left me wishing I'd never started typing that damn message. Buckle up, because husband vanished from our city after I told him the truth is my story, and it's not for the faint of heart. The cursor blinked on the screen, mocking me. Just tell him, my traitorous brain kept whispering. Just get it over with. For 2 weeks, I'd been writing and deleting, rewriting, and agonizing. How do you text someone that your marriage is a sham? That the guy you've been sneaking around with isn't some fling, but the reason you can't look at your own husband anymore? I typed the words, cold and brutal despite their simplicity. Then I jammed my thumb down on the send button before I could chicken out. Silence. Not the normal pause of a text conversation, but a thick, choking silence that made my ears ring. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, smash the damn thing against the wall. Instead, I shoved it in my pocket and stared at my reflection. It's over, I said aloud to the weary-looking woman in the mirror. He'll get the message, and that's that. My voice didn't even sound convincing to my own ears. The grocery store loomed ahead. I didn't want to go in, but the fridge was empty, a testament to weeks of takeout and ignored meal planning. The damn list in my hands suddenly weighed a ton. Milk, eggs, his favorite brand of coffee. I squeezed my eyes shut. Had I left it on the list on purpose? Some petty part of me hoped he'd notice, feel that little sting of betrayal. Inside, the bright fluorescent lights made my head pound. Every couple holding hands, every casual laugh felt like a personal attack. His coffee, dark and bitter on the shelf, practically screamed at me. I grabbed some random brand, tossed it in the cart, and fled to the checkout line. The rest of the day was a blur. His absence wasn't new, the affair had ensured that, but this was different. This emptiness was final, this was the space he'd leave, forever. The Google search results hit me like a ton of bricks. Betrayal trauma? Surviving infidelity? Am I a monster? Suddenly it was less about him, and more about what the hell was wrong with me. Every clinical term felt like a slap in the face. I slammed the laptop shut. Nope, not dealing with that today. Lisa came over that evening, bless her heart. She brought wine and that worried, eyebrows slightly raised expression I'd come to dread. I should have been grateful, but every sympathetic, "How are you doing?" just made me want to scream. Did she know? Did she suspect? I'm fine, I lied, topping off my glass. Better, actually, it's a relief, in a weird way. I didn't even try to make it sound convincing. Her pitying smile stung way worse than an accusation would have. The rest of the week was a blur of work, thankfully busy, and sleepless nights. Every song on the radio, whether it was sappy pop or screaming metal, was suddenly about heartbreak and betrayal. Had I been this clueless when we were happy, or had everything always been a lie? Worst of all was the smell. Not his cologne, though that haunted me too, but the lingering scent of him everywhere I turned. It'd waft off a passing stranger and send me spiraling. I wanted to rip out my own nose, just to make it stop. One night, after too much wine and not enough food, I tackled the elephant in the room, our photo albums. Digital, of course. It felt safer, somehow, to delete a file than tear up an actual picture. Yet, each pixelated smile I banished into the recycle bin felt like a miniature murder. Hours blurred together while I clicked and clicked, flashes of happy memories stabbing with each deletion. Finally, exhausted and emotionally eviscerated, I collapsed on the bed. I didn't even have the energy to cry. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, shattering the dead silence of 3 a.m. for a hot, desperate second. I thought it was him. Some drunken confession, a plea for forgiveness. I snatched it up, just a spam text. I chucked the phone aside, but the jolt of adrenaline was enough to banish any hope of sleep. Our last fight played out in my head like a broken record. His shocked face, the way his voice cracked when he finally spoke, the awful words tumbling out of my mouth. The truth, ugly and undeniable. I was the villain, there was no way around it. The days that followed were torture. I became a pro at faking normalcy at work, plastering on a smile and making small talk. But each time my phone lit up, hope flared, only to be smothered by disappointment. Had he blocked me? Disappeared? Worse, was he already with someone new? The internet was no help. His social media, radio silence. A ghost town where our posed, happy life used to be. I obsessed over it, scrolling endlessly. I was part stalker, part masochist. And then, the phone call that made my blood run cold. His mother. Usually, our chats were polite and surface level, but her voice, there was a tremor to it, a hesitation I'd never noticed before. Have you heard from him lately, dear? I'm a bit worried, the unspoken question hung in the air. Did you finally drive him away for good? 1,000 lies raced through my head. It'd be so easy to blame his absence on work, some vague trip. But something made me blurt out the truth, strip bare. He knows about everything. He hasn't contacted me. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, a soft sob and a whispered, "Oh, my dear," before she hung up. And then came the guilt. Real, gnawing guilt that was somehow worse than the shame. My hand instinctively reached for his spot on the couch before I remembered. Empty, cold, I shoved a throw pillow there, a flimsy barrier against the void. The TV blared in the background, some mindless sitcom I didn't even care about. Distraction, that was the goal. It wasn't working. The worst part was the questions. From well-meaning coworkers, shabby neighbors, the cashier at the damn grocery store. How's everything at home? They'd ask, innocent smiles on their faces. Every time, I had to relearn how to breathe, how to plaster on my "I'm fine" mask. A lie, every damn time. And then there was him. The lover. The reason for the mess I'd made. His text. One measly, "Are you okay?" hovered on my phone screen, a constant accusation. I wanted to type back, spill my guilt, beg for forgiveness. Or maybe scream in all caps, "You did this too." Instead, I blocked his number. Another small act of self-preservation, another piece of myself I barely recognized. The guilt twisted inside me, a constant hum beneath the numbness. But there it was, flickering in the darkest corner of my mind, relief. It felt monstrous to admit, but I couldn't deny it. No more pretending, no more dodging his questions, his silent judgment. A terrible freedom, laced with poison. One afternoon, sunlight streaming into the dusty living room felt unbearably bright. I couldn't stay locked up anymore, couldn't hide behind my carefully crafted lies. For the first time in weeks, I ventured out. Just to walk, aimless at first, but each step felt defiant. The city didn't magically look different. Yet, something had shifted. I was no longer a ghost haunting familiar streets, but a woman, exposed and vulnerable. The weight of secrets didn't vanish, but it mingled with a strange anticipation now. What next? That was the terrifying, exhilarating question. The morning I swore I'd actually make it into the office, his toothbrush fell out of the bathroom cabinet. It clattered on the tiles, a tiny plastic missile aimed right at my heart. I froze, staring at it, and then something inside me snapped. That goddamn toothbrush was not going to win. I shoved clothes into a backpack, ignored the gnawing worry that I was running away, not just going to work. The train felt like a lifeline, its mindless bustle comforting compared to my own swirling thoughts. Each station I passed felt like another mile between me and the wreckage of my life. But the office wasn't a sanctuary I'd hoped for. His name echoed in unfinished reports. I found myself staring at his empty chair, imagining him there, accusing. My usual efficiency crumbled. I buried myself in menial tasks, answering emails with clipped responses, just to keep busy, to keep my brain from catching up. Lunch was spent wandering aimlessly, pretending to be fascinated by overpriced salads and boutique shops I couldn't afford. The envy was back, twisting in my gut, as I watched couples strolling by. They had what I'd shattered, or did they? The thought was dangerous, seductive. By the time the workday ended, I was exhausted, but the idea of returning home was unbearable. I found myself in a dimly lit bar instead, the sharp tang of whiskey a welcome assault on my senses. Strangers clinked glasses around me, their laughter and conversations a comforting white noise to drown out my own thoughts. With each drink, the knot in my chest loosened a fraction. I wasn't fixed, not by a long shot. But neither was I paralyzed. I could keep moving, if only one shaky step at a time. That, for now, felt enough. The buzzer rang, its high-pitched whine slicing through my fragile morning. Not another, "How are you doing?" sympathy visit, please. I dragged myself to the door, expecting some takeout order I didn't remember making. It wasn't food. A small, brown box sat on the mat. His name, scrawled in that familiar handwriting I used to love, stared back at me. A return to sender notice mocked me from the corner. So even his belongings had given up on him. I kicked the damn thing under the couch, ignoring the satisfying thump. The rest of the day was spent avoiding the living room, that hidden accusation waiting to be dealt with. I tried to lose myself in spreadsheets, but the numbers blurred. His face kept flashing through my mind, angry, betrayed, just gone. That night, the nightmare found me again. He was yelling, but the words were muffled, indecipherable. I reached out, desperate to explain, but he vanished into swirling darkness. I woke gasping, sweat-soaked and trembling. Sleep, the oblivion I craved, had become another form of torture. My phone buzzed non-stop, messages piling up. Sarah, David, even old college friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Had the news somehow spread? Every text felt like a noose tightening around my throat. I shoved the phone into a drawer, unable to confront their worried inquiries, let alone the mess of half-truths I'd have to spin. The package under the couch taunted me. It had to be dealt with. Opening it felt like breaking a taboo. Inside, A book he'd ordered, a new hiking backpack, random stuff that spoke of a life now abandoned. Trash or donate, it hardly mattered, the ache in my chest had nothing to do with these forgotten objects. I slumped on the couch, defeated. The space beside me felt vast, an emptiness that mocked my fleeting sense of escape. I was hunted, not only by my guilt, but by the relentless exposure of it. His disappearance wasn't the end, only a terrible, drawn-out beginning. The book I picked up felt wrong. It had been on the bedside table for weeks, one of his choices, and now the sight of it made my stomach clench. But something stubborn in me refused to give up. I forced myself to read a page, then another, willing myself back into some semblance of routine. It was just a book, not a booby trap. Days bled into one another, a blur of work, numb half-attempts at normalcy, and nights haunted by his absence. I'd wander the apartment barefoot in the evenings, the echoing silence amplifying every creak and groan into a potential threat. Was that his footstep? My overactive imagination was painting a fresh kind of hell. One morning, I walked past the corner coffee shop I used to frequent with him. A couple laughed at a table by the window, their ease a mockery of my shredded nerves. I caught the barista's eye, and swore I saw pity flicker across her face before she looked away. Had the whole city turned into one giant jury, judging my every move? The whispered rumors started subtly, not direct accusations, but raised eyebrows, a sudden silence when I entered a room. People I barely knew offering unsolicited advice on getting through difficult times. I wanted to scream that this wasn't some generic heartbreak. I'd caused this disaster, and every sideways glance seemed to confirm it. Then came the voicemail. His mother again, her voice strained and brittle. I just saw him. In the supermarket. He looked. Well, I thought you should know. The floor tilted beneath my feet. He was here, in the city, like a lurking ghost. And now everyone would know I'd lied. I spent the rest of the day in a numb haze, imagining the confrontations. Him, eyes blazing, cornering me in a grocery aisle. His mother's tears of sorrow and relief that he was alive, if not well. Or worst of all, silence. Him refusing to acknowledge me, erasing me from his existence just as thoroughly as I'd erased his from mine. The text bubble stared at me, empty and mocking. It was almost a relief, those few frantic taps of the delete key, erasing the confession before it could ruin me even more. The truth, choked down, festered inside me instead. Sleep had become the true enemy. The bed, with its expanse of cool sheets and echoing space, was unbearable. I started sleeping on the couch, curled up tight in a pathetic imitation of safety. Each time I woke, heart pounding, I checked my phone with a desperate hope I knew was ridiculous. Still nothing. Work days were a blur of forced conversations and meticulously masked anxiety. But the nights, those belonged to my unraveling. His toothbrush, that stupid plastic thing, still glared at me from the bathroom cup. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, yet the sight of it made me sick. It became a kind of twisted ritual, proof that this hell was real, not just some fever dream. I found myself obsessively checking his mother's social media. Vacuous posts about her knitting circle, photos of her cat, nothing. But I clung to it, scouring every mundane image for some clue, a hidden message only I could decipher. The silence was the worst. It screamed at me from every corner of the apartment. And it wasn't just his silence anymore. Lisa hadn't texted in days. My colleagues' pitying glances had morphed into outright avoidance. He was winning, erasing me from his world, and mine was crumbling around me as a result. One afternoon, I cracked. The bar had become my guilty haven. In the dim light, with the burn of cheap whiskey, the edges of my panic softened. That day, I didn't just have one. Or two. I lost count, lost track of time, the bartender's concerned frowned just one more blurry detail. Stumbling home was difficult. But in that hazy, alcohol-soaked state, a reckless plan began to form. It was stupid, desperate, possibly insane. But as I passed out on the sofa, a twisted flicker of defiance sparked in me. I wasn't going down without a fight. My head pounded like a war drum when I woke. The half-empty bottle of whiskey on the floor was a mocking testament to my meltdown. But beneath the hangover haze, a reckless determination fueled me. Time for lies was over. I wasn't going to hide anymore. The ring came off first. It felt heavier than I remembered, leaving a pale, accusing band on my finger. I shoved it into a drawer, a tiny act of rebellion that brought no relief. Next came the bigger lies. Ones that wouldn't just disappear with dodged questions or ignored texts. Emails were harder to fake, official communications left a trail. I sat at my laptop, fingers trembling, and crafted my masterpiece. An overseas job offer he couldn't refuse, a sudden departure, just vague enough to be believable, especially with my forced cheeriness. I hit send and stared at the screen. It was done. And then, the craving hit. Not for more booze, but for him. The ghost I'd conjured. I had to go back to that place, the little bistro where we'd first met. Was it pathetic? Of course. But I clung to the twisted comfort of reliving what was lost. The bistro was unchanged. Cozy booths. The smell of freshly baked bread, couples whispering sweet nothings across their tables. Every detail was a fresh wound. I didn't order wine, like we used to. Just coffee, black and bitter, to match my mood. As I left, I knew I'd made a colossal mistake. Instead of closure, I felt even more exposed, the lies I'd woven a noose around my neck. Yet, there was a perverse thrill, too. It was out there now, this fake happy ending I'd created. The consequences would come, I knew that. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't just reacting. I was acting, no matter how destructive it might be. The rest of the day was spent in a state of jittery anticipation. Would his mother call, breathless with relief? Would concerned colleagues email? Would he appear at my door, somehow having seen through my pathetic charade? Nothing. But the waiting, the not knowing, was its own special brand of torture. The apartment felt like a prison. Each echoing silence was a countdown to disaster. It came in the form of a phone call, my heart thundering as I saw his mother's name flash on the screen. Here it was, the unraveling I'd so foolishly set in motion. He's back, she'd choked out, a sob catching in her voice. I saw him, in town. He looked terrible, but he's alive. Her voice shifted, confusion lacing through the relief. Your email? About the job, didn't he tell you? It took me a few awful seconds to process what she was saying. The overseas job was real? My manufactured lie had somehow become the truth. But how? Terror twisted in my gut. I stammered out some excuses, vague promises to talk to him, to clear up the misunderstanding. None of it made any sense, even to me. Hanging up, I stared into space. The room seemed to spin. My grand scheme had blown up in my face, leaving me more exposed, more vulnerable than ever. News spread quickly. Lisa's hesitant text arrived next, a mix of cautious concern and thinly veiled suspicion. Heard he's back? Want to talk? You know I'm here. Colleagues, distant relatives, I felt them all zeroing in with morbid curiosity, the buzzards circling a dying animal. I shut my phone off. Cowardly, but self-preservation kicked in. I couldn't face the questions, the accusations, the whispers turning into shouts. Instead, I drifted. I cleaned. A frenzy of scrubbing and sorting, desperate action to combat the chaos in my head. But even the spotless counters couldn't erase the sense of impending doom. And then, the worst of it. Walking home from the grocery store, I saw him. Not a blurry figure on a corner, but him, real and undeniable, right in front of me. He looked thinner, shadows under his eyes, but I'd know that face anywhere. He stared back at me, shock turning to cold fury. I opened my mouth, but no words came. There were no excuses, no explanations that could fix this. Then, he simply turned and walked away, erasing me from his world as I watched, helpless and heartbroken. The rest of the day passed in a blur of tears and trembling. I'd craved certainty, and now I had it, cold and terrible. He was back, and he wanted nothing to do with me. Any lingering hope, any delusion of reconciliation? Dead. It was my own doing, and the weight of it threatened to crush me. The first time I saw Mr. Adams, I knew my world was about to tilt. He walked into the room like he owned it, and technically, he did. As the new guy at Henderson and Company, I should have focused on the spreadsheets, but there was something about him that I couldn't ignore. Charismatic? Sure. But that's an understatement. He had this aura, you know? I caught myself stealing glances, more than I should have. Things escalated quickly. I found myself on the receiving end of Mr. Adams' attention. It started with, "Great job on the report, Sarah," and snowballed into, "You look nice today." Flattering, yes, but I brushed it off as him being nice. That was until the company party. Picture this. A dimly lit room, music blending with chatter, and there I was, clutching my drink like a lifeline. Then Mr. Adams was beside me, his voice a soft contrast to the surrounding cacophony. We talked, laughed, and for a moment, I forgot I was just Sarah from accounting. But when his hand brushed mine, it sent a jolt through me. I should have walked away then, I know that now. But I didn't. Word travels fast in an office. By Monday, whispers followed me like a shadow. I could feel the eyes on me, the unspoken questions. I shrugged it off, buried myself in numbers and deadlines. But there was this nagging feeling in my gut, a warning I chose to ignore. Then there was John, my husband. He sensed something was off the moment I walked through our door. "You seem different," he said one evening, his eyes searching mine. I laughed it off, told him work was just hectic. But the truth was, I was changing, and I was scared he could see it. The tipping point was the business trip. Mr. Adams needed someone from accounting, and surprise, surprise, he chose me. "It's a great opportunity, Sarah," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. I knew it was a bad idea, but the thrill, the sheer recklessness of it was intoxicating. I packed my bag, telling John it was just work. But as I zipped it shut, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. I hardly recognized the woman staring back. She was excited, yes, but there was a trace of something else. Fear? Guilt? Maybe both. As I sat in the cab to the airport, my phone buzzed. "John. Good luck, love," his text read. It felt like a punch in the gut. Here I was, diving headfirst into something I knew was wrong, and there he was, being the supportive husband he always was. Sitting in that airport lounge, waiting to board the plane with Mr. Adams, I realized I was at a crossroads. One path led back to my comfortable, predictable life with John. The other? A leap into the unknown, driven by a dangerous mix of attraction and curiosity. Little did I know, my choice would set off a chain of events that would change everything. But that's a story for another day. Who's Mr. Adams? That was the question that shattered the silence of our kitchen. John stood there, my phone in his hand, his face a mix of confusion and hurt. I had forgotten to delete those texts, the ones where Mr. Adams and I crossed a line that should have stayed uncrossed. I tried to play it off, saying Mr. Adams was just being friendly, but John wasn't buying it. He had always been sharp, seeing through my half-hearted lies. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, and I felt trapped. I lied, said it was nothing, but the distance between us grew wider with every word. The affair with Mr. Adams started soon after, like a wildfire. We met in secret, in places where no one would recognize us. It was reckless, I know, but it was also thrilling in a way my life with John hadn't been for years. Mr. Adams made me feel desired, alive, and I was too caught up to see the consequences. But secrets have a way of coming out. One evening, after a risky rendezvous, a colleague saw us. I didn't know at the time, but they went straight to John. The thought of someone knowing, it panicked me. I should have stopped, but I didn't. John confronted me again, this time with more than just suspicions. He was broken, I could see it in his eyes. The man who had been my rock, my constant, was crumbling because of me. So, I did the only thing I thought I could do, I admitted it. The affair, the lies, all of it. And then I asked for a separation. John was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low, I had to strain to hear it. Why, Sarah, why him? I didn't have an answer, or at least not one that would make any difference. I muttered something about being unhappy, but the truth was, I didn't fully understand it myself. That night, I packed a bag and left. I left the home we had built together, the life we had shared. I left behind a man who had done nothing but love me, and for what? A fleeting affair that I knew deep down wouldn't last. As I drove to the small apartment I had rented, the gravity of what I had done began to sink in. My marriage was over, my reputation at work was on the line, and for the first time in a long time, I was truly alone. The excitement I had felt with Mr. Adams was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. I lay in bed that night, in a room that felt as unfamiliar as the choices I had made. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the life I had just walked away from. And as I closed my eyes, I wondered if the thrill was worth the price I was now paying. The day I moved out of the house I shared with John felt like stepping into an alternate reality. There I was, in a tiny apartment that echoed with emptiness, surrounded by boxes that held fragments of a life I had just turned upside down. The walls were bare, the air stale, a stark contrast to the warmth and love of the home I'd left behind. Mr. Adams, he was there, promising me the world as I unpacked. I'll leave my wife, he said, his words weaving a future I wanted to believe in. In that small, dimly lit apartment, his promises felt like a lifeline. So, I clung to them, diving deeper into an affair that was already costing me everything. But secrets, they have a way of spreading like wildfire. Soon enough, whispers turned into rumors at work. I'd walk into the office, and the chatter would stop, eyes following me as I passed. Colleagues I once considered friends now looked at me with a mix of pity and disdain. My professional reputation, built over years of hard work, was unraveling faster than I could salvage it. In the midst of this turmoil, John filed for divorce. Infidelity, that was the reason stated in the cold, legal documents that landed on my doorstep. Seeing it in writing, stark and undeniable, was a gut punch. It made everything real in a way it hadn't been before. John, the man I had shared my life with, was now a stranger, reduced to signatures on divorce papers. The fallout didn't end there. Friends who I had laughed with, cried with, shared secrets with, began to distance themselves. Calls went unanswered, invitations stopped coming. Even my family, who had always been my support system, expressed their disappointment in hushed tones and heavy sighs. The look in my mother's eyes, one of heartbreak and confusion, hurt more than any words could. In the quiet of my apartment, I'd sit and let the reality wash over me. The affair, which had started as a thrilling escape, had turned my world into a lonely island. I had traded a life filled with love and companionship for stolen moments that left me feeling emptier with each passing day. As I lay in bed at night, the silence of the apartment was a stark reminder of the choices I had made. Gone were the familiar sounds of John's steady breathing, the comforting creaks of a house that had been a home. Instead, there was just the hum of the city outside, indifferent to the turmoil inside me. Looking back, I wish I could say I saw it all coming, but the truth is, I was blinded by a fantasy, ignoring the reality that was crumbling around me. The price of my choices was becoming painfully clear, and yet, there was no turning back. I had set things in motion that I couldn't undo, and now, I had to live with the consequences. There's nothing quite like being confronted by your lover's wife in the middle of a crowded cafe. That's how Mrs. Adams chose to drop the bombshell. She stormed in, her eyes blazing with a fury that made everyone else fade into the background. "Sarah," she hissed, and the room seemed to hold its breath. The confrontation was brutal, her words like daggers, sharp and unrelenting. I sat there, frozen, as she laid bare the affair to a room full of strangers. The aftermath of that public spectacle was immediate. Any semblance of a support network I had left crumbled away. Friends who had been teetering on the edge of staying in my life now vanished. My phone became a silent testament to my isolation. Even the sympathetic looks from a few colleagues at work dried up. I was an outcast, alone in a mess of my own making. Then came the final blow in my personal life, the divorce. John won, and honestly, I didn't put up much of a fight. How could I? He had the moral high ground, and everyone knew it. The sympathy he received from our mutual acquaintances was well-deserved, but it stung. Each expression of support for him felt like an indictment against me. I was the villain in our story, and the public verdict was unanimous. Work became a minefield. Whispers followed me down hallways, and colleagues who once greeted me with smiles now offered nothing but cold shoulders. My assignments started to dwindle, handed off to others under the guise of redistributing the workload. It was discrimination, plain and simple, but I was in no position to complain. My professional reputation was in tatters, collateral damage in the fallout of my personal life. Amidst all this, Mr. Adams started to pull away. Our secret meetings became less frequent, his messages shorter and more distant. I could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing the risk I now posed to his reputation. The man who had whispered sweet promises was retreating, leaving me to face the consequences alone. I remember sitting in my apartment one evening, the silence oppressive. It dawned on me that I was not just fighting a losing battle, I was fighting it alone. The affair, once a thrilling escape, had become my prison. I was paying for it, not just with my marriage and friendships, but with my dignity and self-worth. I'd lie awake at night, replaying Mrs. Adams' accusations in my head, feeling the weight of judgment from my colleagues and the growing distance from Mr. Adams. The realization hit hard: I was not the victim of circumstance. I was the architect of my downfall, and the loneliness I felt was the foundation I had laid, brick by brick. In those moments of clarity, regret was a constant companion. I had traded everything for a fleeting fantasy, and now I was reaping the whirlwind. The path I had chosen was littered with the debris of broken relationships and lost respect. And as Mr. Adams' presence in my life faded to a mere shadow, the magnitude of my folly became painfully clear. The moment I saw the envelope on my desk, marked, "Formal Warning," my heart sank. It wasn't unexpected, but it stung all the same. The words, "unprofessional conduct," leapt out at me, a stark reminder of how far I'd fallen. It was a slap in the face, a wake-up call that I was no longer just Sarah from accounting, but Sarah, the center of office scandal. As if on cue, Mr. Adams chose that moment to drop his bombshell. "I'm staying with my wife," he said, his voice devoid of the warmth it once held. Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. I had gambled everything on a future with him, and now, I was left with nothing. The floor seemed to fall away beneath me, and I felt adrift, lost in a sea of my own making. In my desperation, I tried to reconcile with him. I told myself it was love, but deep down, I knew it was fear of being alone, of facing the consequences without the safety net he had provided. But he was resolute, cold even. "It's over, Sarah," he said, and with those 3 words, the last thread of hope I was clinging to snapped. Work became a struggle, my mind was constantly elsewhere, replaying the mess of my life over and over. Numbers and reports, once my refuge, now felt like insurmountable mountains. I missed deadlines, made errors, and with each mistake, I felt my professional credibility slipping away. I was spiraling, and I couldn't find a way to stop. The rumors, meanwhile, were relentless. They spread through the office like wildfire, each retelling more exaggerated than the last. I could feel the eyes on me, the whispers behind closed doors. I had become a pariah, shunned and isolated. Colleagues I once considered friends now avoided me, and I couldn't blame them. I had become a cautionary tale, a subject of office gossip. Lunch hours were the worst. The break room, once a place of laughter and shared stories, now felt like enemy territory. I'd sit alone at a table, the empty chairs around me a stark reminder of the solitude I had brought upon myself. I'd eat quickly, avoiding eye contact, the murmur of conversations around me a constant reminder of what I had lost. I'd go home to my empty apartment, the silence a stark contrast to the cacophony of the office. There, in the quiet, I couldn't escape the reality of my situation. The affair, which had once seemed like a thrilling adventure, had left me broken, both personally and professionally. Night after night, I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, the events of the past months replaying in my mind. The warnings, the rejection, the isolation, it was a never-ending cycle of regret and self-reproach. I had made a series of choices, each one leading me further down a path of self-destruction. And now, as I lay there in the dark, I was forced to confront the truth. I was the architect of my own downfall. Sitting alone in my dimly lit apartment, it finally hit me, I had no one left. The silence was deafening, a stark reminder of the isolation I'd brought upon myself. My phone, once buzzing with messages from friends and loved ones, now lay silent, a testament to the bridges I'd burned. Financially, things were spiraling out of control. The legal fees from the divorce were piling up, each invoice a harsh reminder of the cost of my mistakes. I'd look at my dwindling bank account and feel a knot of panic in my stomach. Budgeting became my new reality, with every penny spent sending a wave of anxiety through me. In desperation, I reached out to old friends, hoping to rekindle lost connections. But the reception was cold, messages left unanswered, invitations declined. It was clear they had moved on, unwilling to associate with the person I had become. Each rejection was a blow, a painful confirmation of my newfound status as an outcast. Then came the news that felt like a punch to the gut: John was getting remarried. Hearing about his new life, so full of happiness and promise, was like looking through a window into a world I was no longer a part of. It underscored my loneliness, highlighting the stark contrast between our paths. He had found a way to move on, to rebuild, while I was stuck in the ruins of the life I had destroyed. At work, my situation grew increasingly precarious. My performance had been slipping for months, but now it was under official review. Meetings with HR became a regular occurrence, each one more disheartening than the last. I was walking on thin ice, my every move scrutinized. The job I had once been so proud of was now hanging by a thread, my career teetering on the edge of collapse. I would sit at my desk, surrounded by the buzz of office life, feeling more alone than ever. My colleagues' laughter sounded distant, their conversations like a foreign language. I was there, but not really, a ghost haunting my own life. The work, once a source of pride and accomplishment, had become a Sisyphean task, each day a struggle to maintain a facade of normalcy. At night, I'd trudge back to my apartment, each step heavy with the weight of my reality. I'd eat dinner in front of the TV, trying to drown out the silence with mindless shows. But the distraction was fleeting. As soon as the screen went dark, the truth of my situation would come crashing back, leaving me to face the long, lonely hours until dawn. In those moments of solitude, I'd reflect on everything I'd lost: my marriage, my friends, my professional integrity. I was a ship adrift, with no port in sight. The choices I had made seemed like a distant dream, a series of misguided steps that had led me to this point of no return. I'd lie awake, the darkness a canvas for my regrets. The faces of those I'd hurt would flash before my eyes, their disappointment a heavy cloak around my shoulders. I was trapped in a cycle of remorse and self-pity, unable to find a way out of the labyrinth I had created. The day Mr. Adams cut off all contact was the day the last thread holding me to my old life snapped. His final message was brief, a cold end to what had once been a burning flame. He blocked my number, my emails, even on social media. It was like he vanished, taking the last piece of the world I knew with him. That's when the walls of my small apartment began to close in on me. The silence became a constant companion, only broken by the ticking of the clock, each second a reminder of my isolation. My thoughts turned into a whirlpool, dragging me down into darker depths. Sleep became elusive, and when it did come, it was filled with restless dreams. I'd wake up feeling more tired than before, a hollow shell going through the motions of a life that had lost its meaning. An eviction notice soon followed. I remember staring at the paper, the words, "failure to pay rent," blurring before my eyes. It was a wake-up call, but I was too far gone to answer it. The reality of being homeless loomed over me, but I couldn't muster the energy to do anything about it. My finances, already strained from the divorce, were in shambles. I was sinking, and I couldn't find a way to swim back to the surface. In my desperation, I turned to the one thing that promised a temporary escape: alcohol. It started with a glass of wine in the evening, but soon it wasn't enough. The wine turned into vodka, and one glass turned into several. It numbed the pain, blurred the sharp edges of my reality. But the relief was fleeting. The morning would bring back the pain, the guilt, the loneliness. Only now, it was compounded by a throbbing headache and a queasy stomach. At work, my situation reached a breaking point. My performance, already on shaky ground, deteriorated further. I was making mistakes, missing deadlines, arriving late, or sometimes not at all. My colleagues, who had once been sympathetic, were now openly hostile. I overheard whispers in the break room, caught glimpses of emails. They were petitioning to have me removed from the company. I was a liability, a bad influence, they said. I couldn't blame them, but it stung, nonetheless. I remember sitting in my cubicle, the sounds of the office around me fading into a distant hum. I felt detached, like I was watching my life fall apart from the outside. The job I had worked so hard for, the career I had built over years, was slipping through my fingers like sand. And the worst part was, I didn't know how to stop it. Each day was a battle, a struggle to find a reason to get out of bed, to face the world. I was caught in a vicious cycle of self-loathing and despair, unable to break free. The woman I had been, confident, successful, loved, felt like a stranger. In her place was someone I barely recognized, someone consumed by regret and haunted by the ghosts of her past. As I lay in bed each night, the room spinning around me, I couldn't help but wonder how everything had gone so wrong. The choices I had made seemed like a distant memory, a series of wrong turns that had led me to this moment of utter desolation. And as the darkness enveloped me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a long, downward spiral. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying the video so far. If you do, please take a moment to hit that like button, it really helps me out and lets me know you appreciate the content. Also, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. Subscribing is a great way to stay updated with all the latest videos and to be part of our growing community. It's quick, it's free, and it ensures you won't miss out on any upcoming content. So go ahead, smash that like button and hit subscribe. Your support means a lot and keeps this channel going. Thanks for watching. The night I got into that altercation, it was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. There I was, a few drinks too many in my system, emotions raw and exposed. The bar was crowded, the air thick with the tension of my frayed nerves. Words were exchanged, harsh, biting words, with some woman whose face I can't even recall. It escalated quickly, and before I knew it, the sound of sirens filled the air, flashing lights painting the walls in blues and reds. The police arrived, their stern faces a stark reminder of how far I had fallen. The next day, the hangover was the least of my worries. My boss called me into his office, his expression grim. The incident had made its rounds, another scandal to add to my growing list. This was the final straw. I was fired, effective immediately. As I cleared out my desk, I felt the weight of every disappointed glance, every whispered word. I walked out of the office, a place I once considered a second home, for the last time, my career in tatters. Jobless and with bills piling up, desperation took hold. I started selling whatever I could: furniture, jewelry, even some of my clothes. Each item sold felt like a piece of me leaving, memories attached to them dissipating into the hands of strangers. But the money was never enough, it was merely a drop in the ocean of debt I had accumulated. The job hunt was demoralizing. My reputation had preceded me, a shadow I couldn't escape. Interviews were few and far between, and even when I did manage to land one, the air would shift as soon as my name was recognized. I was no longer Sarah, the competent accountant. I was Sarah, the woman embroiled in scandal. My professional achievements were overshadowed by my personal failures, and it seemed like the industry had turned its back on me. As the stress mounted, so did its toll on my health. I was eating poorly, barely sleeping, and the alcohol, my crutch, only worsened things. My reflection in the mirror showed a woman I hardly recognized. Dark circles under my eyes, skin pale and sallow, a far cry from the vibrant person I once was. My body was rebelling against the constant state of anxiety and neglect, a physical manifestation of my inner turmoil. I remember one particularly rough night, sitting on the floor of my now sparsely furnished apartment. The walls felt like they were closing in, each item sold another square foot of space I couldn't fill. The silence was oppressive, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise in my head. I felt trapped in a cycle of despair, each day blurring into the next, a monotonous march of regret and self-loathing. In those moments, the gravity of my situation would hit me full force. I had lost everything: my marriage, my job, my friends, and now, my health. The choices I had made, one after another, had led me to this point. I was a shadow of my former self, living in the aftermath of decisions that had seemed so right at the time but had proven to be my undoing. It didn't take long for the news of my downfall to spread, not just within the professional circles but also in the social ones. I became the subject of hushed conversations and not-so-subtle stares. My story, once a tale of success, had turned into a cautionary one, a warning of what not to become. It was humiliating, knowing that I was now an example of failure, a lesson in poor choices and lost morals. The day I was evicted from my apartment was one of the lowest points in my life. I remember standing in front of the building, my meager possessions in a suitcase, with nowhere to go. The landlord was apologetic but firm. I hadn't paid rent in months. I wandered the streets aimlessly until I found a shelter that would take me in. The nights I spent there were a blur of despair and hopelessness, surrounded by others who, like me, had hit rock bottom. In a moment of desperation, I reached out to John. I don't know what I was hoping for: forgiveness, maybe, or at least some semblance of understanding. But he wanted nothing to do with me. His refusal to see me was a clear message. I was a part of his past, a chapter he had firmly closed. It hurt, but I couldn't blame him. I had made my bed, and now I had to lie in it. Word of my situation had even reached my hometown. People who had known me as a bright, promising young woman were now shaking their heads in disappointment. My parents, already heartbroken by my choices, now had to face the gossip and pity of our neighbors and friends. It was one thing to lose the respect of acquaintances, but knowing I had brought shame to my family was a different kind of pain. My health, which had been on a steady decline, finally gave in. I was hospitalized after collapsing on the street, a combination of stress, poor nutrition, and alcohol. Lying in that hospital bed, I realized just how alone I was. There were no visitors, no flowers, no get-well cards. Just the sterile white walls and the beeping of machines. When I was discharged, the sense of loneliness was overwhelming. I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The world outside seemed vast and uncaring. I wandered the streets, a ghost of my former self, lost in a maze of regret and self-pity. It was during these aimless wanderings that the full extent of my mistakes finally hit me. I had been so caught up in what I thought I wanted, so blinded by ambition and desire, that I hadn't seen the destruction I was leaving in my wake. My choices had not only ruined my life but had hurt those around me, leaving a trail of pain and betrayal. I found myself sitting on a park bench one day, watching the world go by. Families laughed, couples held hands, and life moved on around me. But I was stuck, trapped in a life I no longer recognized, with no clear path forward. The irony of it all was not lost on me. I had once had everything I thought I wanted, only to end up with nothing. As I sat there, lost in thought, I couldn't help but wonder where it all went wrong. How had I gone from a successful, loved woman to this? A shadow, a cautionary tale, a stranger even to myself? The answers were as elusive as the wind, and as I looked out at the world, I knew one thing for sure. I was at a crossroads, with no map